Welcome to the live stream for Multiplay. I'm Rebecca Caines. I am the lead artist and curator for the Multiplay project. I'm super happy to be here with Yujie and our visiting artist, Michael Waterman, and I'll get them to introduce themselves in just a minute. We have found with these live YouTube sessions, it's good for me to chat for a while everybody's connecting and making sure they can hear us. So I'll just keep doing that for a second by giving you a little bit of context. Michael Waterman's the radio artist who hopefully you've all been listening to on CJTR FM. He has been part of the Plein Air Artist Residency Program, where he has been doing a show every Saturday for the whole of April. And because we couldn't physically have Michael here, we thought it would be really cool to have a bit of an after party where we can chat about what the show was like, and people who are interested can ask questions. This is our first experiment, so we'll see how it goes today. Please live chat if you have any questions for Michael. I'm sure he'd be totally up for answering them. But let's just introduce everyone. Hi, Michael. Can you tell us who you are and what you do?
I'm Michael Waterman. I'm an audio and visual artist living in Ottawa these days. I have a long history of doing radio, using radio in my art practice. Both as experimenting with the content to be broadcast on radio, but also with the actual physical medium of radio, doing pirate radio installations off grid and things like that, experimenting with pushing the bounds of what one can do with radio, exploring the parameters anyway.
And my co-host is Yujie. Hi, Yujie, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm Yujie. I'm a PhD student in University of Regina right now, and my concentration is new media art. So I've been using a lot of light, sound, body movement in my work, and most recently also a performance. And yeah, things interesting is this semester I started using sound, and then when I heard this radio show, it's pretty cool, and I kind of have some questions want to ask.
Sure.
Oh yeah, and I also project assistant for the whole Multiplay project.
Thanks, Yujie. Yes, Yujie's been keeping all the Multiplay artists with support for studio practice, for technical practice, for lots of boring admin work. She's completely amazing for us as we're building this national project based on improvising. I'm Rebecca Caines. I am a socially engaged artist, an improviser, a studier of improvisation, and a professor at the University of Regina in the Creative Technologies program. So if you're just joining us, welcome. We have, I think at the moment, 5 viewers, so that's not too bad for the first experiment. We'll see how we go as the show goes on. If you're just joining us, we were listening to Michael's visiting artist radio show on CJTR FM in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. And now we're having a talkback on YouTube to hear a little bit more about how this amazing improvising and audio collage work happens. So, Michael, tell us about Manlicha Kakano and the collective that has been behind these awesome.
Manlicha Kakano, as a kind of improvising audio group, has a really long history. We actually started in Winnipeg in the mid 80s. At the time, we were all kind of just out of our undergraduate art school, and there's 3 of us really who were quite interested in doing kind of Fluxus style performances using all kinds of found sound and really setting things in motion and then really letting that determine the performance using sound. Although we also used to, in our early days, we used a lot of, we had sets and costumes, and we did a lot of kind of performances at art openings and things. And then about 5 years after we started, we all found ourselves in different cities, which was certainly a defining moment. We could have either ended then, but instead we started to try to explore ways in which we could collaborate long distance. And as it turns out, since about 1990, so for the last 30 years, we have been continuing to collaborate distantly. So this current kind of, obsession with what is that, social distancing we've been doing for a long time. So for the first, 5 years or so, I guess, yeah, 5 or 8 years after when we first found ourselves in different cities, we were quite inventive about different ways in which we would collaborate, doing things like live performances where none of us were present. We would we'd call in to somebody who was receiving our phone calls, because this is, of course, before the internet. And then each line was hooked up to a PA, and we'd be doing live performances remotely, and we wouldn't actually be aware of what the other people were sending in, only after we heard the recording after the fact. We also did a lot of exquisite corpse, projects where one person would lay a track on a 4-track cassette player and then send it on to the next person, and who would do a second track, and so on. And then the person who had initiated it would get it back and could do the final mix down. And we have probably hundreds of those from those early days. But then the next kind of really pivotal moment in the history of Manlesher was in 1998, when I found myself in Peterborough, Ontario, and walked into the campus community radio station there, Trent Radio, because they were advertising something out on the street saying an upcoming radio art day. And I was intrigued. I wasn't quite sure what radio art was. And it turns out they weren't either, really. It was really whatever you make of it, and but it was close enough to what I was doing already that I was drawn into the radio station, and I did a show for their Radio Art Day, and they were very excited by it. And before my show was even over, they encouraged me to propose a weekly show, for the radio station, which I did, and have been doing it ever since. So it's the Manlesher Carcano Radio Hour, of which an edited version we just listened to was last week's edition of the Manlesher Carcano of the show that I do every week. And when I announced that it was 1159th show, that's because it was. It's not, we've been doing it, pretty systematically ever since. And I've moved again several different cities. I moved on to Guelph and then to St. John's, Newfoundland, and now I'm living in Ottawa. But we've continued to do that. And as time has evolved, people have come and people have gone, and we have an open call for really, we used to do it every week. Anybody who wants to is invited to join. All sounds are welcome. And we encourage collaborators. So I think what we were just listening to, there were about 8 or 10 people jamming along in different cities.
That is an impressive one. 1,159 episodes. I mean, that's a collaboration that's pretty impressive. I bet the technology's changed a little bit.
Very much, very much. In the early days, there were no, in 1998, when we started the radio show, there weren't any computers in the radio stations, although of course there are home computers by then, and live streaming of the radio wasn't what really wasn't a thing. So when we started, there was the 3 of us still, one person in Los Angeles, myself in Peterborough, and a third person still in Winnipeg. And we would use the on-air phone and a conference call, and we were using a device to enhance our phone lines, or a couple were anyway, that was published by Negativland, I think, in an early Music Works magazine, a means by which you can enhance the signal you send over the phone line. Again, by basically doubling up the send and the receive, so they're both sending or both receiving. But Trent Radio was kind of ahead of the curve of campus community radio stations. The first place to start streaming their programming, the first place to get computers in the on-air studio. And so in the first couple of years that I was there, it all changed. We started using Skype, and we started, when I moved to Guelph, the Guelph had just started streaming also, and there was a person who jammed with me in Peterborough who used to take the Guelph stream off the air and stream it in the studio and jam along to it, you know. And for the early days, you know, of, I mean, for about a decade, we were doing that a lot. When I moved to St. John's for a while, there were 3 radio stations connected that way: Trent Radio, Peterborough, CFRU in Guelph, and CHMR in St. John's. And now, of course, we went from Skype to Google Hangouts, and most recently to Zoom, because everybody's doing Zoom these days, and it's still early days of our using Zoom, but I think it's better than Google Hangouts, just the quality of sound right now. This is turning into a plug for Zoom. Although, of course, we've always embraced the lower fi qualities of this, and the latency, and you know, all the glitches that are incorporated with it, because, you know, all sounds are welcome, including the, and there's no judgment about hi-fi or lo-fi, you know, in our projects, in our jamming.
We're onto Zoom before most of us had to use it. And so I think it's kind of fun listening to that radio show you played today, where there's, I guess, a lot of people who are suddenly having to work on Zoom have never thought about it as such a playful and creative kind of tool. I think a lot of people having to use it for meetings, for work. So I think it's very fun to start thinking about how you can play with these technologies in new ways. How are you doing the show when people are like, tell us about how you made the show last week.
Okay, so our weekly show, the weekly show is called the Manchester Carcano Radio Hour, but it's actually a 2-hour radio show. So, I used, up until about a year and a half ago, I would be live in the radio, one of the radio stations that, you know, it started off, as I say, started off in Peterborough, moved to Guelph, and then for the last decade it's been in St. John's, Newfoundland, in the studio of CHMR in St. John's. But since I've moved to Ottawa, I have not actually made a connection to a campus community radio station for a variety of reasons, a local one that is. And one of the reasons is that the CHMR in St. John's is still willing to broadcast, you know, our shows. We can't be live, but we what we do is we meet at exactly the same time we always did. Because when you have, you know, up to, you know, a dozen people joining you in different cities across North America and Europe, you don't want to play with the schedule. You want to keep it locked at a certain time. Otherwise, it gets really, really crazy, you know, as far as, you know, people being available to do it. So it's that, and that's one of the reasons why it's been hard to even approach a new radio station, because our demands for a new radio show are pretty high. We want to have it exactly at the same time that we've always been doing it. And so anyway, we meet at the same time and we record. So as our last week's show is being broadcast, we're jamming and recording the next week's show. And we're really improvising. I mean, we set up the connection at the time and we chat a lot. We try to keep the chat, that banter, you know, down to a minimum, but, you know, we're old friends who've been doing this for a long time. And so we need to, there's obviously an instinct to reconnect each week. But then we try to, we get into the, you know, the improvising pretty quickly, although I guess a conversation is improvisation too. And if all sounds are welcome, then, you know, we've never we do blur the line too, and we welcome people to talk in the middle too, if they want, or, you know, people who feel they the only way they would like to contribute is by talking. But anyway, there's a kind of a slight mindset, a shift in consciousness between kind of conversation and improvisation that happens. And then we do our thing for about 2 hours, and then we kind of rise to the surface towards the end and chat again and sign off. And so I've been editing that a bit, those shows down to the 2 hours, because they tend also with that when we're not in a radio station, the constraints of the schedule are a little bit loosened. So I have to tighten them up for the radio to send them to the CHMR to broadcast. And then for what I've been doing for CJTR oh dear, what's the for the Regina radio station? See, I'm terrible at remembering all the call names, but you should tell me this. I'm really really bad. At any rate, for the show that you our listeners just listened to, I took last week's radio show, and after editing it down to 2 hours for our regular weekly show, I edited that thing down to, again, another hour to fit the hour time slot. So it's the creme de la creme of the weekly show.
CJTR is a fantastic radio station. We're really excited that we can partner with them with Multiplay.
Yeah, it's great that they do this, actually. Yeah.
Such a great residency. The idea of having a community radio station artist residency is brilliant. Amber Goodwin should be congratulated. I think it's been a really strong program. We're really happy that you could still be in Regina, sort of. And there's a few listeners just saying hi. We've got people telling us on YouTube that they're really enjoying hearing about the show and that they really enjoy your radio show. Yeah, and I think that probably a lot of us who experiment with sound and improvise would say that listening might be one of the hardest things. How is it trying to listen to each other when you have kind of this different kind of way of improvising?
Yeah, it is a different thing. I also, of course, have over the years been in a number of other ensembles that actually meet in real space and meet together, and that's way more. It's in some ways it's much easier to hear people if you're improvising in the same space as each other, and that's how most people do it. But because we've been doing this for so long, we've developed techniques. For one thing, we started off with quite a kind of a data / fluxus approach to what we're doing, whereby we were not overly concerned with the outcome. It was more the activity that we were doing that was important, and what happens will happen. We weren't concerned that in the early days, for instance, we were the best way to clear out a house, and we would start jamming, and people would flee in droves, and we were quite impressed if people were actually managed to stay to the end of one of our performances, and that didn't bother us. So the fact that there are problems with hearing each other when we use these social, like use Skype, for instance, or Zoom, isn't as disconcerting as it might be to other people, because because we're used to or those performances we used to do where we couldn't hear any of us. We were just sending in our performances, and the outcome would be what it would be. So on some level that's happened. And some level I've kind of think of what we're doing as kind of, there's a series of improvisations that are happening in different cities, because sometimes people come together in a single spot, not these days, of course, but often. And they'll hear each other as a group there in each of the different locations, but then all the different locations are kind of tenuously linked. That has also changed now that I'm editing the shows, because I'm making an effort to draw in, to make sure that all the different locations have a presence, and I can do that a bit with the editing in a way that when you're live you don't always hear that. Yeah.
That reminds me, I guess what Yujie's work is exploring interactivity too. You just think about this kind of different kinds of interactivity.
Oh, can't hear you.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's very interesting to see, and also you are using those kind of online platform and performing in the real time. And then I'm actually kind of wondering, when you are editing those materials, how would you design the structures of the piece, of the final work?
Interesting question. It's a pretty subjective kind of approach. Initially I go through the whole file removing, serious clipping and excessive noise. Although again, that's just my own approach. If somebody else in the group might actually welcome those things, but I kind of do a single pass through the whole thing for things that I think would be particularly that actually don't contribute in any way to a listener's experience of what it is. I guess that's what I'm going to say. So I am making I am making aesthetic judgments all along, especially when in the editing phase, not so much in the performance phase. And then I will go back again for time to make sure it fits into the time. Once I've got the levels, sometimes I'll be boosting. Mostly I'm editing for having a nice kind of line of volume, so that if it's all, so that it doesn't, if sometimes I hear something very interesting that is kind of underneath the level of the other things, and so I'll bring those out and I'll lower other things, and so it's molded a little bit like a physical sculpture. I can bring out certain things that appeal to me, and subdue things that don't. Then of course fitting it into the time length that is required. That's what I do for my weekly radio show. For this radio show, it was very interesting to make several more passes through the kind of the edited version already, in order to reduce it even further. And at that,
we just lost your sound there, Michael.
Do you not hear me? Oh, I can't hear you now, but yes. So I mean, I think I just do more of the same though for this radio show. I quite like the chance to kind of more finely honing it. It's a little bit like an academic work. You write something and then you refine it, and I like the chance to do that even more so for this residency project, where I think that probably an hour's worth of it is tighter and more varied and interesting than the longer version, except for that there isn't the kind of the durational experience of the 2-hour thing. Otherwise, it's I like I like doing this project. It's an interesting thing.
It's like improvising with the improvisations in some ways, because you're sort of looking at material and using it again.
Very, very much so. Yes. Yeah.
And then all these new participants who join you, I guess, or somebody in the group knows, and then you, I guess, have to get a sense of what they do to be able to think about how they can work together.
Yeah, it's almost more the new participants have to find their own way. If they do it regularly, they get quite comfortable with what they're doing. But we try to be as welcoming as possible. But they're people who haven't done it much, especially if people have never been with one of us live. If they're all of a sudden joining from having never done it before, are unsure about what are permitted to do and what they're not, although in fact anybody who wishes to, and anybody listening to this right now is anybody who wants to can join the show, and they're permitted to do anything. Yeah,
not enabling constraints, but maybe there aren't any.
Yeah. We've always had this kind of there are no rules, kind of attitude towards it.
Radio must shape a little bit how you think about what you're doing.
What was the first? What should shape it? Sorry, what did I miss that?
Medium of radio.
Oh yes, well yeah, but then that's we like to play with some of the conventions of radio too. Like there was a period back in the maybe 15 years ago where I was really interested in dead air, and I would actually. I wasn't editing the show, we were doing it live, but there would be times when I'd just bring all the levels down and see how long I could just, do dead air on the radio and then bring it back up again, and things that, basically if it's a rule in radio, you want to break it and see what happens, or we do, that's our instinct.
I love it. If there's a rule, we want to work out how to break it.
Yeah.
I was also going to just talk to you a little bit about Multiplay and the project you had been going to be doing gallery, but we've now moved to next year. Can you tell everyone a little bit about what you were going to be working on with Multiplay? Because I think that's something that people have been very interested in.
Yes, well, I'm looking forward to doing it eventually. It's just on hold, not over. It's also related to my work with Manisha Carcano. And it's kind of a hybrid museum installation slash kind of performance venue and interactive performance venue. What I've been working on is, well, I've invited 3 members of Manisha Carcano to make videos using as a soundtrack this sampled stuff from our radio show, and then to have visual content that correspond again of their whatever they wish, you know, to correspond with the audio that they're making. And then in a gallery setting, I intend to have the audio coming through each individual component coming through parabolic speakers, which are kind of speakers that that isolate what they're broadcasting from anybody else. So you don't really hear what's coming, or you don't hear very much of what's happening unless you step right underneath of them. And each in the space I have, you know, each one of these videos will be on a little stand, on an iPad on a stand. And as you go up to it, you'll be underneath a parabolic speaker, and you hear the sound that's coming from that one contributor, you know, that one video. And then you can walk away from it and walk into another and hear another. So you're hearing, but then when you're stepping between these different parabolic speakers, there's a kind of, the whole space is filled with the sound, a mix of the sound on a PA, so that you can hear the whole mix, or you can step into one person's little world, as it were, and hear and see what they've created. That's the way it is, and it will be presented in installation form. But then the whole setup is designed so that when available, and all the Manisha participants can use this setup to do a linked, you know, performances. Again, you could see them on the iPad. You'll hear what they're contributing, and you can also, there'll be mics there so that you can actually jam along with individual members of Manisha Carcano, or you can step outside of these little bubbles that have been created in the gallery and hear the whole mix. So that's it's called Radio Rhizome, and it will come to Regina sometime, and also other places. Plan install in a couple of places. Yeah.
You rescheduled for spring 2020. So at the Dunlop Sherwood, thank you, Wendy and the Dunlop for inviting us to reschedule it when COVID got in our way. We're really happy that you'll still be able to come.
Right.
Just because some people have just joined us, we're just doing an after party after Michael Waterman's radio guest spot on CJTR FM with the plein air artist residency. So yeah, the other thing I was kind of excited about, Michael, and I'm looking forward to next spring, is us coming in and chatting with you in the gallery. We were going to set you up in the gallery all week, and people could come in, and because I think what happens a lot with radio is that you don't get to see the visuals of what's happening behind the scenes.
No.
Super curious when you're creating these awesome sounds, how you're doing it, what you're doing there on the spot. So I think it's kind of like exposing the secret underside of management.
Yeah, it's I guess it's hard for me to really think of it as interesting, but if anybody who doesn't do it, I guess they'd be very curious. It's just a lot of knob twiddling and playing with things, but I know that at the end of a 2-hour jam, my studio space that I do downstairs gets quite messy, because I'm always stepping up and pulling out other things to make sounds with. And, you know, because we've been doing this jamming for so long now, for 30 years, there's a lot of kind of nonverbal, you know, communication that goes on, like cues. Somebody, you know, will introduce some sound that will reference something that happened maybe 20 years ago or more recently, and I'll respond in kind, with some sort of other sound, So there's a lot of kind of what is it like? Kind of mythology that's connected around our group too. We all have Malasher names, and we all when a lot of our press is of kind of is unreliable, should we say? I forget where I'm going with this now. Actually, I think it's the way we communicate non-verbally and verbally, I guess. That it's kind of become a culture of its own, really, over time.
A lot of people are interested in that kind of open studio, like seeing work, and that's something Multiplay has been like. Part of why we put this project together was that improvising artists do have amazingly messy studios sometimes, and there's a reason for that, because we're grabbing and moving through. I know Yujie's been experimenting with kind of opening her studio as part of her practice. Did you want to talk about that, Yujie?
Yeah, because one of the thing is for my own practice, the process will be part of the work as well. So it's just the final work. It's also how the process being changed, where it started, and what's the point, and what's the why it got changed, and so what kind of factors shaped the final work as it shows at the exhibition. So I think it's also very important to get to see how the whole process being going through. So yeah, and
I'm hoping that we can maybe use our 360 camera we've been exploring with too, because we thought it would be fun for people to kind of zoom around the radio setup.
Oh, yeah.
If you would.
Great. Yeah.
And I'm hoping next week, Michael, you might be able to bring some of your sound makers on the show and show people.
Yeah, I could certainly do that. Yeah. I can, or I can bring this down to my studio, and we could chat down. Right now, I've kind of have a little sound studio set up in the basement, where I do my recording, So yeah, that would make it will look less tidy than our upstairs living room. Although I just noticed you can see the laundry basket, behind me. But other than that, we have a well organized house in general until you go to the basement.
Well, I was just saying that we're all developing little new studios in our basements, right? As we're kind of locked in and can't access our other spaces. I, at the moment, have a bunch of speakers on a bed in our guest bed, and my mixer kind of on a box. And, I'm trying to still do some of the experimenting, but obviously we've all had to suddenly shift spaces and reset up spaces.
Yes.
For you, I think you already had a home kind of space, and maybe it wasn't as big a change.
Yes. Because of my practice as an artist, and because I don't have a studio since coming to Ottawa outside of the house that I'm living in, so it's set up in the basement already anyway. Yeah.
We're ahead of the game again.
Well, actually, the constraints of the COVID-19 are exactly the way I've been living my life anyway. I as long as I can get out for a walk each day, which I still can do, then there's not a very drastic change between what I was doing before and now, because I do a lot of cooking anyway. I cook, and so I'm just doing what I always did: cook, do my art, and go out for a walk.
That's great. That's really good.
And
finding it a creative time, and other people are finding it difficult. I guess it depends on how many children are hanging on to you as you're trying to do things too.
Yeah, exactly. We're very fortunate that our children have moved beyond that stage.
So I was just curious, and I think there's a couple of people listening who might be curious about when you're working in the radio studio and you're feeling like people are listening, and you have these people kind of interacting with you, you know, what are some of the strategies for continuing that interaction or getting people involved? Because you said you don't, you know, it's a different mode talking about it, so you don't want to have a lot of talking, but strategies for kind of interactivity and engaging listeners that you've explored over the years?
Well, you mean people, yes, I find it's easier if I have somebody sitting beside me who's never done this before. I can give them some little sound maker that I know is going to blow them away. You know, it's something very simple and like, you know, I don't know, a toy synthesizer or something like that. And they immediately can get results on it. And that is their entree into, if they're feeling uncomfortable. Some people, it depends. I just gauge, you know, on how people are feeling. There's very few people that have come to the radio show and have sat stiffly throughout the whole 2 hours and not become involved in one way or the other, although there have been one or two, but mostly people do, you know, even who are a little bit unsure at first, become more comfortable as the, you know, they get used to it. I don't know what other strategies I employ in particular. We always give new participants a Manlisher name. And my longtime collaborator, Really Happening, who lives in Los Angeles, one of the founding members of Manlisher Carcano, he's a genius at coming up with, you know, witty kind of, you know, names, and he's taken to recording them somewhere so that if we ever have a new member, he's got a name at his fingertips to christen somebody that seems appropriate, you know, to the person.
If we had names for this show, could you give us a Manlisher Carcano name, or does it have to only be if we're improvising?
Well, it's, if you're on Manlisher, you'll get a name, but we're talking about it. We're not really on it yet, but you're more than welcome to jam with us. You know, I don't think you ever have, actually. The invitation is extended to you, of course, and anybody who's listening. And I'll do a little plug too. I'm sure that they could always find my contact information through you. But we also have a blog spot online, manlishercarcano.blogspot.com, and Manlisher Carcano is all spelt as all one word. And if you don't know how to spell Manlisher Carcano, or don't even know its origin, all you have to do is Google the gun that Lee Harvey Oswald used to allegedly assassinate Kennedy.
That's where it comes from.
Yes.
Amazing.
Back in the 80s, this is in the mid 80s, there are all kinds of post-punk industrial bands out there with unpronounceable German names. And so it was a bit of a parody of those names, you know, Manlisher Carcano. And also we were embracing, you know, conspiracy theories. And this is yet another one.
I have jammed with you, Michael, but I cannot remember my name.
Oh, no. I can't remember it either. People have to remember. This is the other thing. It's as the years go by, one of the requirements is not only that you know, is that you remember your Manlisher name, because we won't.
Batteries.
What was that?
Like it might have had something to do with batteries, because we were using microphones that needed batteries or something. I have
batteries. Oh yeah. If you can recall the date, or roughly when it was, I can go back through the archives, because I have every show recorded, you know, so I could probably find out, but I would need to know the date.
I will see what I can do. We will all be jamming with you when you come to Regina.
We estimate that over the 30 years, there's been hundreds of people that have jammed with Manlisher, hundreds. But we've never really recorded it. I mean, that's a job for some student of Manlisher in the future to try to, annotate, to document that, write it down.
Well, when you come back, I know all the Multiplay artists are interested in coming in and jamming with you. So Helen Pridmore, Campbell, Colophon, Audio Arts, James Harley, who you know so well, Michelle, myself, and Yujie, we'll all be definitely interested in coming.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
I feel like all of Multiplay will have Carcano names.
Carcano names, they will. Yes.
Yujie, do you have any more questions for Michael?
Oh, can't hear you again.
Oh, I was dropping a little bit, couldn't hear very clearly. Yeah, I think I have my question asked.
All right. Well, we'll save up all our questions for next week, but I was hoping next week we could talk a little bit about some of your other projects as well.
Sure.
Also, if you can bring us into the noisemakers and the studio in some way so we can see a little bit more of what it looks like to be part of it, that would be super cool too.
Yep, yep. I could certainly, you know, expand from here into describing at least some of my radio projects, you know, like my pirate radio projects. I mean, I've made a lot of things over the years, but I can't really, but I could focus on radio related things, and if you'd like, yeah, okay.
And I just want to say that we're so grateful to the Canada Council for the Arts for funding the Multiplay project. It's the Digital Strategies Fund, and I cannot believe the timing in terms of the support they're giving artists right now to explore different digital ways to engage right at a time when we desperately need it. So thank you to the Canada Council for Arts, and also to CJTR FM for hosting Michael Waterman as a plein air artist in residence. Particularly Amber Goodwin for setting up this fantastic partnership that we are hoping will continue with the rest of the Multiplay project, because I feel like there is a lot of ways that radio can connect. And like Michael, I'm a huge fan of campus community radio. I think it's where passion lives. I think it's where art can have no boundaries. So we're really happy to partner with CJTR. And I just want to say thank you, Michael, for coming along to the YouTube Talkback After Party.
Yes. It was. We'll do it again next week.
Thanks, Yujie. Thanks, everyone. And thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.